Hi, I'm Brent, and I look after digital strategy and marketing at Cover. Having helped many small and large companies in the insurance industry with their brand building for more than 36 years, the Cover team decided it'd be helpful to create a podcast series that distills brand and digital marketing frameworks and concepts into actionable steps. The focus is on helping insurance professionals drive growth in their business. By blending our knowledge of financial services and marketing with our unique media approach and our insights into the South African and broader African markets, we make core marketing concepts understandable, actionable, and measurable to directly improve revenue and brand growth. Cover's growing brand series will provide resources and regular conversations with marketing professionals, bringing you better practical examples that can move the needle on growth. Welcome to today's episode. We're joined by Elliot Schwartz, a seasoned executive with decades of experience in marketing, insurance, and business management. Elliot dives deep into what strategy truly means for your business, how to effectively differentiate yourself in the market, and the critical role of consistent brand building. He shares practical insights and real-world examples like Renasa's success story that you can apply to enhance your marketing efforts. Tune in to discover valuable strategies that can add significant value to your business.
Thanks, Brent. It's great to be here again.
So I thought it'd be appropriate to kick off the series with you, this growing brand series with a focus on strategy. So if we start by getting your view on the role and value of strategy, it often seems like something that's quite overlooked. And I think the reason for starting there, the marketing environment is it's always in flux, it's evolving. We have new platforms and tools emerging. And I think this can be both confusing and overwhelming for small businesses, brokers, and advisors. So where do you see strategy fitting in from a marketing standpoint?
And that's a good question. And the way I want to start answering it is by quoting Winston Churchill in a different context when he said that the US and the UK were two countries divided by a common language. I think business in general is divided by a common language. We use lots and lots of terms, but nobody means the same thing. And one of the most abused words is strategy. Everybody talks about strategy, but what you have in your head and what I have in my head are not the same thing. And I'm going to tell you what's in mine, not because I'm necessarily right, but because it puts the context to what I want to talk about. Okay, most people, when you ask them about strategy and you ask them to define it, what you get typically is a description of a planning process. Okay. Some will put more emphasis on the process itself, and some will put more emphasis on the plan that comes out of the process. And strategy does involve planning, and it is a process. And I'm not here to debate what process you use. But the point is that you're doing that for a purpose. And that is what tends to get overlooked. What strategy is, in very simplistic terms, at the end of the day, is very simply the plausible reason why a customer, and it doesn't matter whether you're talking about individual customers or businesses, the plausible reason why a customer will spend his money with you as opposed to the other guy. Okay. That's all it is a definition of doing that. And yes, you want to plan for it, but you also need to implement, and that's also part of strategy, is how you consistently implement for it. And the most important thing, it's about how you're going to make money. You're going to get the customer to spend money with you. And what I always find perplexing is when people talk about strategy, they almost never talk about profit. And the whole point of strategy is to deliver the profit that the owners of the business expect at the level of risk they're prepared to bear within all the legal and moral constraints that they want to put on the business. Okay. That's what it is. How do you do that consistently over time? Okay. Now, marketing obviously has an important role to play in that. And my definition of marketing for this discussion, very simply, is creating the conditions that facilitate your ability to sell. You can only sell as much as people are prepared to buy from you. Okay. And people, generally speaking, don't buy products or services they don't know or understand. In particular, they don't understand how they fulfill a particular need they have, because nobody buys a product for its own sake. It's always a means to an end. Airlines sell seats on planes. That's their product. Customers buy transportation from A to B. In a business buys something that will improve their fundamental economics. It's either an ingredient in their product or process, or it's something that'll help them sell more, or sell faster, or bring down their cost. It impacts their economics. So that's what they're looking at. And they don't buy products that they don't understand how they fulfill the need. And generally speaking, they also don't buy products from people they don't know. So the whole point of marketing is to get people to understand how your product or service will fulfill their particular need and why they should trust you as the person to sell it to them. Okay. And in a nutshell, that's what it's all about. So marketing is an important part of strategy because it is something that facilitates the revenue line of strategy. How you're going to make more money is a function of maximizing your revenues and minimizing your costs. Obviously, you also want your marketing to be as cost effective as possible.
Okay. Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. And I think a couple of thoughts come to mind when you were talking about sort of the execution side of it and almost, you were talking about the aspect of fulfilling a need. And I often think about, um, brokers, small businesses, do they take a step back and think about what value are they adding? What is their unique value proposition? How do they articulate that? So they're not just, outright selling a service. What do they bring to the table that's going to truly add value? Just almost that sort of mission purpose, as you would think of it in a sort of business context. It is quite an important thing. Do you have any advice there for a broker or small businesses in terms of how they could think about that?
Yeah, it's not just for a small business, but for any business. It starts by putting yourself in the customer's shoes. At the end of the day, as I said, a company lives for its product. If they don't sell that product or service, they don't eat, they die. But customers, the product or service is a means to an end. So understanding why they buy it. Nobody needs insurance. Insurance is a means to an end. Okay. It mitigates a risk. Okay. So understanding what the risk is, you understand why they buy insurance. Now the question is, why should they buy it from you? Okay. And ultimately, there's only three potential reasons why somebody buys something from anybody. And every business to a certain extent has made already limiting decisions. One reason people buy from you is because they don't believe they can get that product or service anywhere else. Okay. You have something unique. And if they want that, they must get it from you. And when people talk about differentiation in a business, they start off usually by thinking about product differentiation. But the reality is that most product differentiation is relatively cosmetic. It's what I call a pink screw. Your product has a pink screw in it, and his has a blue screw in it. Yeah, it's different, but it doesn't necessarily solve a different need. And yes, there are some insurers. I am a strategic advisor to a heavy commercial vehicle insurance business that has a unique product. If you want that, you could only get it from them, and it solves a need, which is allowing the better heavy commercial vehicle fleet owner to participate and benefit from superior risk management. Now that's great, but it's also unusual. Most insurance companies, and especially brokers, don't necessarily sell unique products. They don't necessarily need to. Okay, because the more generic products probably appeal to more people. So there are other ways to differentiate. The second way to differentiate is in terms of doing business differently. People will choose to do business with you because they like the way you do it. It's not so much about what you sell, but it's about how you sell, how you service the customer, how you fulfill and distribute, and so on and so forth. And there are a lot of businesses, I call these platform businesses, that differentiate in that aspect. The initial direct insurance players, for example, differentiated in terms of how they sell. Today, most insurers sell in part direct. So just because you have a call center or whatever doesn't necessarily mean you differentiate in terms of how you sell. Okay. But there's other ways to differentiate as well. And the third way you can differentiate is in terms of ownership of a class of customer or the attempted ownership of a class of customer. And by this, I don't mean simply defining a target market. Everybody defines a target market in the sense that nobody tries to sell to everybody. You can't. I mean, even if you wanted to, nobody has the resources to do that. So we get selective. And we tend then to focus down. We will look at, for example, a demographic, a geographic area, or an income group, or whatever it might be, we think is more likely to buy our product and service. And we'll direct, for example, our marketing efforts at that demographic. That's not what I'm talking about. That's just good marketing. It makes you more cost efficient. What I'm talking about in this type of strategy are businesses that seek to own a particular type of customer. And by own, I mean have a dominant majority market share in that market and maximize the lifetime value they extract from those customers. And this is a strategy where the other types of strategies are transactional. You're looking at a margin on each. In this type of strategy, you're looking at the lifetime value, including swings around. It's capturing the customer early, trading them up over time to more products, to higher value products, and keeping them loyal for longer. Okay. And a good example of that in the insurance industry in South Africa would be PPS, which targets degree
Graduate
professionals.
professionals. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
There are 60 million people in South Africa. There's only a few 100,000 degree professionals. But if you're not a doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, MBA, PPS isn't interested in you. But if they are interested in you, they're going to recruit you early. They're going to recruit you while you're studying on campus. And they're going to try to, over the lifetime of your relationship, upsell you and cross-sell you into more products and services and keep you loyal. And their business is built around doing those things. Okay. So if you're a broker, the first question you've got to ask yourself is, I can be any of these things, but do I want to be known as someone that provides a differentiated product, such as the brokerage that I strategically advise in heavy commercial vehicles, who is the largest player in HCV as a consequence? But they sell a very limited product range. It's really only one product and certain things around it that they sell. They're known for that. Okay. If you want that, you can only get it from them. Or do you want to be known as a business that services the customer in a way they like to be serviced? And it doesn't matter what you sell or who you are. It matters that I like doing business your way. Or do you want to be a business that sets out to own a particular class of customer, as I described in that case? Then what you have to do is build on that. Obviously, from a marketing perspective, you got to get people to understand that's what your brand is about. That's the need that you can fulfill differently than anybody else. And I'm stressing the word differently because before a customer buys from you, they're not going to believe you're better. We'd all like to be seen to be better, but the reality is until somebody actually tries you, your customer tries you, and you deliver on what they expect, they can then post-rationalize that you're better. But before the fact, it's how you are going to be plausibly different in satisfying their needs. So you have to build that as a brand, but then important, you can't just go out and say it. You have to do it. And then you have to take the tough decisions to engineer your business to deliver that at the expense of other things. Going back to your initial question about strategy, the toughest strategic decisions any business takes is not what it's going to do. It's what it's not going to do. The business that it's going to walk away from. Okay. And the reason for that is you have to give up stuff to own other things, to own one thing. Okay. And you can't be the best at all of those things. Okay. And if you try going down two or three different roads at the same time, you're going to do none of them well. Okay. So you've got to give up the other stuff in order to do the one thing right. And it doesn't matter whether you're small or large. Even the largest companies can't go down multiple roads simultaneously.
100%. Yeah, there's some really good stuff there. I'm going to circle back to one of the points that you put forward there in a bit, but I wanted to just take a look at brand building quickly, and just come back to one of the points you made. So I like the investment mantra of it's about time in the market as opposed to timing the market. And I see a lot of companies, and there's often an outlook on very sort of short term goals. And as much as those things are certainly important to sort of measure success along the way, I think that consistency from a brand point of view certainly, plays out over time. So I'd love to get your thoughts on brand building and the value of that.
You know, I find always a little amusing is all of the kind of touchy feely philosophy that goes around brand building. You know, building relationships and all that. It's actually true, but the way it gets packaged undermines the kind of hard nosed reason for wanting to do these things. And as I said before, people don't buy products and services that they don't understand from people they don't know. The whole idea of selling is predicated at getting a customer effectively through a funnel that's upside down. Because when you start, your business is a funnel and it's upside down. And we know with a right side up funnel, where the wide part's at the top and the narrow hole is at the bottom, gravity does the work. You pour stuff in the top and it runs out the bottom. But
Yes.
in the business world, it's the other way around. Okay. And you have to work to get people up the funnel. And I'll explain what I mean. Outside the funnel is every suspect. And by that, I mean anybody that can conceivably buy your product or service. Okay. The problem is you don't know them and they don't know you. Okay. At the very top of the funnel, if you like, are your most loyal customers, the handful of customers that buy everything from you all the time. And not only that, they go out and tell people how good you are and they bring you business. Effectively, they're doing your marketing job for you. Okay. Now, your objective in business is to turn suspects into these missionaries. Okay.
Yes, the
And
brand
it's not
advocates.
exactly, it's not one easy step, because the first thing you have to do is get them into the funnel. And as we said before, you always target who you try to get in, because you can't afford to waste money talking to people that will never be interested. So the first job you do is trying to identify and target the real prospects out of those suspects, the people that are most likely to respond to your message in order to make it cost effective. Having identified those people, the next step is to get them into the funnel. And you've got two options from a marketing perspective. You can either do it outbound, and by that, I mean you identify them. And in this digital age where we rely more and more on data, that's becoming more and more common. Okay. You go directly after the ones that you pre-screened. Okay. Or you do it on an inbound basis, which is more the traditional way. You go out and run an ad, and people that like the ad come to you. But it doesn't matter. Once they're into the funnel, okay, let's understand that at that point, they know very little about you. They're not yet ready to make a purchase decision. So you have to start then with the people who have gotten into the funnel, build understanding and awareness of who you are and what you are. Okay. And only when they get to a sufficient point can you ask for the order. Okay. So the next step is now asking for the order. And assuming they buy, you then have to mitigate buyer's remorse. Because anytime people buy something for the first time, they think, well, have I done the right thing? So you need to reinforce that they've made a good decision. Having now stabilized, right, your next step is to increase their purchase percentage. You want to get a bigger share of what they buy. Ultimately, you want them to only buy from you, ideally. If you have multiple products to sell, you want them to buy more products and you want them to stay loyal for as long as possible. And only towards the end of that process, when they're comfortably loyal, can you effectively motivate or incentivize them to become your missionaries. So getting from one end of the funnel or outside the funnel to the other end of the funnel is a process that takes time. And you're going to have customers at every stage along the funnel. So brand building takes time. Okay. You can often put out a selling offer, a product or a service that's really desirable at a good price and get a lot of response right away. Those two arguments aren't in conflict. But if you want to consistently grow your business, you have to work at building that brand. How you build the brand, the things you focus on, the kinds of activities you engage in will depend on your business strategy. Okay, what it is that you're trying to communicate, and second, where you want to focus in the funnel at any given time.
Perfect. Thanks, Elliot. I'm making some notes, some good input there. I liked you touched on quite a few concepts that I'll try and sort of expand on in the notes around inbound, outbound awareness. I think there was a sort of STP framework around segment, target, and then position. So I think there'll be some value there for brokers and everyone listening. My next question, I think, maybe packages some of the stuff you've commented on. So you touched on relationships sort of briefly. You mentioned the word relationships. You mentioned data and marketing, and I was wondering. So what I'll add to it is the value of communication. So what value do you think relationships and personalization have to play in the current marketing environment? I think certainly using data and marketing to sort of effectively do that would be something to maybe comment on from your side. And then looking at potentially ways in which a company like Renasa has excelled there. I know that you use some really good work at Renasa. You can maybe shed some light on some of those thoughts.
Let's understand that every business will be different in terms of what it needs to focus on from an information perspective, as they are different in terms of their strategies. If you have a business that's about a unique product or service, the probability is that you have very few things to sell. You only have that product or service. I mean, you can take Apple, for example. It's one of, at times, the largest company in the world. Okay. But in reality, it only has one or two things to sell. Whether you regard the laptop and the phone as different variants of the same underlying technology, or whether they're two products, I'm not going to debate it. They only have one or two things to sell. Everything else is a spec variant. Okay. Bluntly, when you only have one or few things to sell, your business strategy is around volume. Okay. You only make money if you sell lots of. So your focus from a marketing and business development perspective will always be focused on finding new customers. Okay. Because your growth is a function of getting more people to buy your product. The assumption is that if people like your product because it's unique, they're going to buy it again anyway. You don't have to invest in customer loyalty, because the loyalty is their satisfaction with the product. Yes, you need to continually invest in improving and updating your product so it stays unique, because if you stand still, someone's going to copy you. But from a marketing perspective, you go looking for new customers. So the information you want is around, where can I find sufficient numbers of new customers? Is it a different geography? Is it using a different distribution channel? How am I going to reach customers I haven't reached before? Because my lifeblood is new customers. Okay. At the other end of the tape, or the other end of the spectrum, a company like PPS. PPS has a limited and finite number of customers they can sell to. Okay. If you're not a degree professional, they're not interested. Their objective is to get the biggest possible share they can of that class of customers, and then over the lifetime of the relationship, extract the maximum value they can out of those customers. So for them, loyalty is everything. Okay. Because if they lose a customer, there isn't necessarily another customer to replace them with. So yes, they will have a loyalty program, and their data requirements are about getting better fundamental insight into the needs of their class of customer. They have to understand their customers better than any of their competitors, so they can better anticipate their needs and be in a position to solve, to provide a solution to their needs. And it doesn't matter to PPS where the solution comes from, whether they underwrite the product themselves or bring it in from another insurer and badge engineered. Their customer trusts them to understand them better and find the appropriate solution. So it's a different set of information and data needs. Okay. Now, going to marketing techniques. And again, too many people believe that techniques in and of themselves are the solution. Okay. And let's understand that media, and by media, I mean any way in which we reach customers for communications purpose. Media is always changing and evolving. And the assumption that people have that a new type of media necessarily is better than old types of media is not true. Okay. Each medium needs to be evaluated in terms of what it does and how it works best with whom. And your decision in terms of what you use is a function of what you're trying to accomplish. When I first came to South Africa as a consultant in the late 70s, TV was just starting. It was one channel and it was on for a few hours a day. And if you wanted to advertise on TV, you were limited to like 8 or 12 spots in a year. I mean, if you got one commercial a month, that was a lot. Okay. And we've seen how TV has evolved. But TV didn't end radio. TV changed the nature of radio, but radio works in a different way because radio is a much more cost-effective way to reach people frequently. It lacks the visual impact, but it gives you a chance to say things a lot. Okay. When online media came, it didn't necessarily displace TV, but it performs in different ways. Different types of digital media work in different ways. To a certain extent, yes, digital media has displaced certain print media. You've seen it in your own organization, but that's not because for certain things it does a job better. It just does it more cost effectively. A magazine online is read like a magazine in print. It's just less expensive to produce and distribute. In fact, you probably lose a little bit of the impact. We're perfectly honest. And in an ideal world, you might do both. But the reality is in businesses, you have to take tough choices. And sometimes it makes more sense to do something that might be marginally less effective, but a whole lot more cost effective. The benefit's greater. And I think that's basically what you guys have done with your magazine. But you're not just doing the magazine. You're using other digital media in different ways, because one of the advantages of digital media over, call it older and more traditional media, is it allows for an interactivity, both with your customer back and forth, and also across customers. Okay. So customers can also interact with each other. That's what social media is about. And is social media good or bad? Well, it depends what you're trying to accomplish and whether you're properly prepared to manage it. It's great if you want that kind of both vertical and horizontal interactivity, but it's terrible if you don't want it or you're not prepared to manage it. Because if you want to manage it, you have to provide content on an ongoing basis to get people back on an ongoing basis. And you have to be in a position to moderate what happens. If a customer complains on a platform, you better respond to that immediately. Otherwise, you're doing yourself a disservice. So media choice is a function of what you're trying to accomplish. And it's also a function of what you can afford. In an ideal world, a media mix makes sense because different media work in different ways and they have a cumulative benefit. But the reality is most businesses, I mean, brokers are not in the main large businesses, but most businesses can't afford a highly diversified media mix. And too many just follow the conventional wisdom of trying to have a diversified media mix and end up doing a half-hearted, ineffective job everywhere. And it's far more important to do a good job in at least one place than it is to do a poor job across many places. Now, you asked me about Renasa, and that's been very much Renasa's strategy. Now, what is Renasa? Renasa is an insurance business that has identified a class of customer, the, the independent intermediary, that they want to be important to. So they're effectively a class of customer business. Okay. The products they sell, they may have the odd specialist product through a UMA, but the reality is the products they sell are in the main no different than the products you can get from other insurance. Okay. But people go to Renasa, I should say independent intermediaries go to Renasa because they believe, for good reasons, that Renasa understands their needs better than other insurers. Renasa doesn't distribute any way other than through independent intermediaries, and it's built its business to service those intermediaries. It provides technology that's a benefit to the intermediary, not simply to make the insurer more efficient. Okay. And on top of that, it still provides the kind of hands-on personal service that brokers used to get and still appreciate. They still have a regional network of representatives, and whether they're dealing with you face to face or online, like we're doing now, the bottom line is that when you deal with them, you're not offloaded onto a call center. You still deal with an individual by name. So that's the strategy. If you is to be the place that the independent intermediary will prefer to do business. Okay. And to support them as a result. Now, from a marketing perspective, when we started down this road with Renasa, and I'm talking 20 years ago, okay, the reality was we were dealing with a small insurance license that was taken out of runoff. Okay. If you knew about Renasa, it was probably a legacy of the old Reliance National South Africa that went into runoff. So at best, you didn't know them. At worst, there's something. These guys have a bad history. So for any insurance business, trust and credibility is paramount. You're expecting them to honor claims, and you don't give your money or your client's money to somebody that you don't believe is solid enough for them. So it was important for Renasa that they be seen to be an established and responsible player in the insurance market, not some new upstart or something that had come out of runoff. The problem was we had a very limited budget. Our marketing budget when we started marketing Renasa, and admittedly it was 20 years ago, was only 10,000 rands a month. But even then, that wasn't money. 120,000 rands a year. Now, how do you build a brand and convince brokers when you have limited resources? And the point I made before is the important one. When you don't have a lot of money, it's important you do at least one thing well. And what we did was partner with the trade media that also has a vested interest in servicing the independent intermediary. And that included you guys at Cover. Okay. And in those days, it also included Risk SA. They're no longer, but what we did along the way was enter into a partnership with the FIA, the Financial Intermediaries Association. And the reality is that we work together and we support each other to mutual advantage. You guys as media need content. We're always prepared to provide content. we have advertised consistently in every issue over time. And we spent disproportionate to our size and look to be as big and prominent in our advertising as possible. But we also ensured that our advertising was as cost effective as possible. We've utilized a cartoon illustration strategy. We built two characters, Archie and Roger. Archie, the perpetually perplexed broker, and Roger is his clever dog who knows the answer to his problems, Renasa. And they have, over 20 years, uh, covered lots and lots of interesting topics and are well known and liked by the insurance industry. And we have stuck with it consistently over time. And we still don't have a large budget. We spend less than a year, okay, than many of the big insurers spend in a week on advertising. And yet we believe we have a significant impact because of that consistency over time. So a broker, a small broker, and understand when Renasa started, book we had was the size of average high street broker. Okay, that's all we had to start with. So I'm saying, even though this was the carrier, the same rule applies to a broker. By being consistent over time, hammering your message home over time in a way that the customer likes and relates to, is something that's going to work for you. But you have to give it time and you have to stick with it. Why do people not stick with it? I mean, this is a digression, but it's an important point. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in and around the marketing industry. I've been a marketing director of a company. I've been the owner and the CEO of an advertising agency. I've seen it from different perspectives. Marketing people, or the people responsible for marketing within a business, are their own worst enemies. Okay. The reality is, number one, marketing people that are employed into positions, we're very honest, don't intend to stay in that position forever. And the bigger the company, the worse it is. People come into a marketing job with an intention to move on to a bigger marketing job. Now, if you're trying to build a CV, what do? You
You can put
come
your
in
personal touch on something.
and change everything.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because to go into your next job interview and the interviewer says, well, what did you do? You say, I changed nothing. Okay. It's a hard sell, but that's usually the right decision. They come in, they change the advertising, they change the packaging, they change the logo. And, often in the short term, you get a little blip, but in reality, all it does is drive you back to start. And then you got to start building all over again. Okay. You don't want that kind of short term up and down. You want a consistent upward spread. So, number one, don't change your market. And the second reason that things change is people that deal with their marketing activities, their advertising and whatever on a day-to-day basis get bored with it long before their customers do, because we see it all the time, every day. Okay. And now we're bored. We want to change things. That's not necessarily malicious. It's just human nature. But the reality is the customer hasn't gotten bored with it. They don't see your marketing activity that often. Okay. And having something familiar as a hook when they do see it is, if they're interested, what's going to get them to pay more attention. So that consistency in that time, and it doesn't matter whether you're doing it in traditional media or new and digital media, consistency over time is what works.
100%. So you almost run the risk in somewhere potentially diluting the sort of brand that sort of the equity you've built if you're constantly sort of chopping and changing. Elliot, one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about that was just like closing the loop, from a client standpoint, in terms of getting input along the way as you're sort of building that brand. Is that something that you've done over time? Is sort of tested some of your material or what you're doing to sort of see if it still resonates? And if you are maybe wanting to change something, going down that route of input?
Yeah, there are different ways to test these days, particularly with digital media. Your test is putting things out there and seeing what happens. You get a real world, real time test because you get almost immediate feedback. The amount of data that you can get online is incredible. Okay, in the old days, for more traditional media, there are ways, for example, to pre-test customer responses. You can do focus group interviews of a TV commercial to see if people actually understand and like it. Okay, it's not quantitative, but if people are not getting the message out of it that you wanted them, you know you have a problem. Okay, and so on and so forth. So yes, there are ways to test, but the good news is increasingly the real world is the test of your marketing. You'll know pretty quickly whether or not something's getting the response you want. And ask your customers. At Renasa, we're always getting feedback from our brokers about our advertising. Okay, and
Fantastic.
that's important. And the day they start telling us they don't like Archie and Roger, I'm afraid Archie and Roger are going to broker and doggy heaven. But we're not there, and it's 20 years down the line. And but that day may come, and it's something that we have to always be looking for or anticipate.
100%. Elliot, thank you so much for your time. I don't know if I could sum the conversation up, but if I could try and put a few points forward, probably something we've mentioned a few times. So consistency plays out over time. Mm, try and be hyper focused on that one thing. And I think one of the things you alluded to in the conversation was around as much as the sort of there's a consistent shift in how things are being done, the fundamentals remain the same. And I think strategy is certainly sort of key to anything someone is doing, especially as it relates to marketing.
I think that's a good summary. Thank you.
Thanks, Elliot. Thank you so much for your time.
A pleasure.